this is the way that I relate to that whole experience now. It's like if there was somebody who was like, hey, like I'm doing this to wake you up. I'm doing this because this is you need like this little gentle nudge to bring yourself into the light, like into awareness, for lack of some better terms. I feel like a really great time for this because I've now gotten to the place with this where I'm able to relate to it in a different way. And we're like sharing this. Like at one time, like sharing this was like, oh God, like there's this thing that happened to me, and I just have to like get this off my chest and just share this, story every now and then. But more so, I can relate to this much more so in a, hey, here's an experience, but here's the takeaway from it. Here's the lesson from that, the silver lining, if you will.
Welcome to the Epic Kate podcast, a podcast that is about spiritual transformations, journeys of healing, and compassion. This is a place to get curious about wonderful people out there that are making the world a better place. I'd like to introduce you to Nathan and his amazing story of spiritual awakening. He is an American vet. He shared about the track that he was on from anger and grief to healing. Here is a trigger warning. He doesn't go into graphic detail, but there is some talk about things happening in wartime situations, and that could be troubling for some of you out there listening. We do also touch on the fact that people in the military are at a high risk of suicide and give encouragement and support towards that. I connected with Nathan through something called Rainbow Magic, which is led by Aubin Labrosse. I'll share more about that at the end of the conversation, but just to give you a very brief synopsis, it has to do with chakras and inner child healing and facing pain and alchemizing it into the opposite and finding movement and healing in your life. You chose this video for a reason, so if you're here, I'm sure that it's going to speak to you. So let's dive in. Hello, Nathan. It's so great to connect with you. We actually connected through Aubin's Rainbow Magic, so that's kind of fun. We'll definitely want to talk about that later. But could you give us a brief introduction of yourself?
My name is Nathan Carnley. I am 30, currently living in California, and I've lived in a handful of areas around the U.S., grew up primarily in the southeastern part of the country, before heading all the way out west to see what the hippies were up to, as I like to say. And I spent the initial part of my adult years in the military, and then since then have moved into massage therapy and the general like healthcare world. And that is the very brief synopsis of myself.
So the thing that's really interesting is going from, like when we talked earlier, the phrase becoming part of the machine jumped out at me. Would you call like being in the military the machine?
Yes.
And how was that? How did it feel to be in that environment?
It's like I'm just pausing sometimes because that's a big question, right?
Of like, it is a big question. Should I be more specific, or
actually, yeah, like I have some thoughts, but yeah, if you have anything more specific, that would definitely be helpful.
Did it feel like you were kind of molded into this image that you couldn't be yourself?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. It was definitely a formative time, and there's, I think, a lot of, just in my own opinion, there's a lot of value that comes out of being in a pressure cooker like environment, where there is, a group of other It's like for males, right? Like like when at least when I was in, it was all like strictly men in the environment. So there's something about this competitive, everyone is there to push you ahead kind of quality, and there's definitely things that you gain from that, or that I gain from that. And did I ever feel boxed in and like I couldn't be myself? Sometimes, sure. It's social pressures and all that. So yeah, that was part of the experience.
Hmm. That thing about the pressure cooker environment, that is such a good way of putting that. Like, I actually got to be a part of, I was with a theater company for many years, and some of the programming that I was involved in Germany was reintegration training in the military for people coming back from active duty, and that pressure and that, like, to be able
Hmm.
to figure out how to not be in that pressure cooker environment in your head and take that back home. And I was like, wow, I'm not in the military, but I really understand a lot of this mentality of being on high alert and carrying the stress with you of the things you have to get done and that you have to be there. Did you go through reintegration training?
Not that I recall.
Mm.
Yeah. I don't remember it being much of a thing where I was at. And maybe there was some kind of like, hey, here's a quick class, but I don't believe so. It was just you just get on a plane, you just grab your bags and go back to the company and unpack.
Wow. So you actually did see some pretty intense things. So how was that going back to normal after all of that?
Yeah, interesting. I think at the time, back up a little bit here, maybe to add some context.
Sure.
There's a friend of mine who used to work in the realm of like managing political campaigns, and he said something that I found interesting. That was it was like interviewing folks, and people just normalize to their environments so quickly, so that something that was once unimaginable, just like after a couple weeks, like all right, like it feels normal. And
Mm.
so I can say that like when I came back, I felt normal. Um, and there was also several people that I'd known, so people that I'd met after I got into the military, and then we were away from each other while on our rotation. Uh, they said like, hey, you came back different. So this wasn't like family friends from before joining. This is people that knew me. Like we were in the same unit together, saw each other on a fairly regular basis, and then didn't see each other for the period of time for a deployment and came back after that. Those were the ones who were like, you came back different.
Mm.
And I thought that was interesting. And at the time I couldn't really hear that or accept it. I was just like, I don't know what you're talking about. Um,
How did they say that you were different?
I think from roughly what I recall that I was more short-tempered, a little bit more irritable. Those are the big things I remember. Just like overall, just crankier disposition.
Mm. And you were like, "No, I'm not."
Basically, yeah, exactly that.
Can't believe you would say that.
You don't know me. Yeah, yeah, I know. Whatever the.
Do you think that is a compartmentalizing of like this is how I am there and this is how I am here, and you could just keep the never the twixt shall meet kind of a thing? Like the person that you were in active duty versus the person you were back in the States?
Well, I guess that was perhaps part of the issue is that it got to the point where there wasn't that compartmentalization, at least potentially. It's difficult for me to say in retrospect, like, oh, it was exactly what was going on, a decade ago. Yeah, it's
Mm,
been a decade now,
wow.
or more, in my head at the time. Um, so yeah, so I don't know if there was that blurring of lines or if maybe I just kind of got stuck in a certain headspace and just never left.
Mm.
Not never, but at least for a while. And
Did
so
you?
that seems,
Sorry.
I was gonna say that seems accurate to me, is that I just kind of got caught in a particular headspace of this is, how I operate. This is what's going on, of a certain kind of high strung quality, and then just kind of stayed there for some time.
Mm.
Yeah,
So, did you have, while you were overseas, did you have any just formative, like spiritual awakening kind of experiences?
100%. None that I was immediately aware of at the time, and wouldn't become aware of until probably like 6, 7 years later, at least.
Mm.
But yeah, there definitely were. Yeah, we were in a suicide bombing this is back in 2013, and then that was also inside of a minefield. So went really sideways really fast. It's like, oh, that's that, like that started out like that's a lot, and then just proceeded to get progressively worse pretty quickly. And at the time, uh, or at least like over the following months, for a long time actually, I severely like guilted myself over that. Just blamed myself just on repeat, because that's what one does, I suppose.
Mm.
Um, and so to kind of bring it around to like how that became a more formative experience, uh, there is the experience and the process of just dealing with all of that internally. And then there is the process of bringing oneself around to a desire to say, understand the other perspective. And so, like, say, whenever you're like having an interaction with somebody, any time, any day, any place, there is there's like the phrase within the spiritual world, like, oh, we're all just reflections of each other. Somebody is showing you, like, hey, this is what you represent to me in this moment, or this is what you are to me. And so if we take that into consideration, then that kind of brings up the question eventually, like once you're in that position, like, okay, like I've never met you, that person, before. You've never met me before. We've never even seen each other. But here we are in these most extreme kind of situations. It's like, so what is it that I am a part of or representing that warrants such a reaction?
Mm. And you were already having these thoughts there in those moments?
Oh God, no. No, this was like
Not even close.
no, those were absolutely not the thoughts that I was having. That probably came about to varying degrees. I'd say that was like a gradually unfolding kind of a process, but maybe, starting around like 5, 6 years later. I'd say like I probably wasn't until like after I was out and like even just away from the army life period where I had that kind of time and space to or capacity to think that way about it.
Right. Like at that point in time, did you kind of feel like a machine?
Uh, yeah, I would say so. I'd never thought about it in those terms, but absolutely, there was definitely a like everything became, all of a sudden much more real, as it does. And then also, I would say, yeah, machine's probably one of the better words to use to describe that, because I just became very methodical in my thought process of like I'm just even more so, right? Initially, it's like, okay, like I'm here to make sure, myself and then the guys that I'm with all come back, okay. And it just became like the sole focus of where my mind went, to the extent that I considered, we had like a spot. It's like, oh, you can go into this area, you can use the phones and the the internet for getting in touch with your family or whatever, send some emails out, that kind of stuff. And I started considering that a distraction. It's like I don't
Mm.
have time, like time or space to think about contacting my family or friends. Like it's just right here, right now, the next step.
Would you say that would was a glorified way to think? Like, yeah, the best of the best are people who don't let themselves get distracted by those trivial mundanities. What, how do you pronounce that word? But you know.
Hmm. Um, I don't, at the time, I don't remember thinking of it like that as much as it just felt very practical. It felt
Mm.
kind of like almost like a survival instinct of this is, like this is actually the kind of thing where I just want to be as clear-headed and focused as possible. And what's kind of like a metaphor for that? Almost like maybe in the way where there's folks who they're doing something they consider important, right? And they become like so wound up about it and like overly tense that it becomes it negatively impacts the thing at hand. So it was arguably like that, but it was coming definitely from a place of just earnest. Like I think this is the best way to proceed.
And I imagine that there's a feeling of just absolute disconnect of what would I possibly say to them? We have nothing in common. They would never understand the pressure that I'm under. They're just living these easy little white collar lives or whatever.
Um, Maybe to a degree. I don't honestly, it was one of those things I don't even remember thinking about it.
Mm.
It was one of those like I just not here, not now. Like I'll
Mm.
be back home soon enough. And until then, my only focus is on what we're doing here.
What was a point where you were like, I got to get some healing?
Hmm. I don't remember exactly when the realization was, but I started to notice that I was, even in just like regular social situations, and I noticed this after I'd gotten out. So this is probably 2017-ish ballparking, 2017, 2018. Is it that late? Yeah, it was that late. Holy smokes. I would catch myself being out, say like out with friends, and if we were out in an area that felt, public, or I felt unsettled for whatever reason, I would I caught myself at times where I'd have my back to the group of friends that I was with, or I would be standing away from it and just like feeling like I was just kind of scanning the environment. And I didn't,
That instinct to keep everyone safe.
yeah, there would be some times where I wouldn't be necessarily standoffish from anybody from the group exactly, but I would just have that a little bit of extra, I guess, of that quality in me. And
You can't
to a,
just turn that off, right? That I got to get everyone home safe.
um, it's like to varying degrees. And I would say that it's the kind of thing where there's still that instinctual response for myself, and it feels much more um, attenuated, I guess, so
Mm.
that it's appropriate to a situation. Like hey, maybe that would be appropriate if there was some kind of active threat in the environment. Okay, cool. But
But then
and
there's the body trauma responses too, of like how the 4th of July is just so hard, hearing all those bangs and explosions, and wakes up so much PTSD in people.
that is something I've personally never experienced, but I
Oh.
mean, for sure, that can absolutely be a thing for people.
Mm. So you went to California to find the hippies. Was that on your journey of healing? Like, okay, let's see what they got.
Maybe subconsciously. Probably. I never thought about it that way at the time. And if somebody used those words, I'd probably be like, all right, hippie, like, what do you, at least at the time. Yeah, what was that about? I I would say a lot of it was about finding, at least consciously, a greater degree of freedom and opportunity for new experience. Um, Growing up in the rural conservative southeast my whole life, there is a certain kind of felt like restriction that I felt with that.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and I remember I was before I'd gotten out, I had a 2 week vacation block, and there was like, I don't know, it was like I'd be back in for 3 months after I came back from vacation, something like that. So it was kind of my last, like, okay, like decide whether or not I want to stay in moment. And I was sitting on a hill in a park in San Francisco, as one does, called Hippie Hill, in Mission Dolores Park, if you're familiar. And I remember some guy was walking around, and he had a jar of chocolates and a jar of joints, and he was just like loudly and publicly, yelling pre-rolled J's, and he would shake the jar, and he would say edibles, and he would shake the other jar of chocolates. And it was like, man, like you would not. This is before federal legalization, right? It was like you would not see this in Georgia. That would be you'd be you'd be gone real quick. So, and that something about that stuck with me. And
Kind of
I
like,
think there
why
was
the
like
heck would he do that? Was that what stuck with you?
it to me. It just signified a degree of freedom and like not having somebody breathing down your neck for something victimless or like relatively harmless. Um, and part of that was say like being in the military where there's like okay like I'm going to go for a weekend trip or I'm going to drive more than an hour away, which living in Columbus, Georgia, pretty much anything is more than an hour away if you want to get out of this small military, I guess relatively small but very much so military town, um, without you like go somewhere where you're not going to run into somebody from work. You drive to Atlanta, drive to Auburn, drive to a couple hours, so a town that's a couple hours away. And we would have to submit like request forms for that, and just like these little things, and they could get denied, like, oh, if you're going to be off in some part of the world, you're driving an hour and a half away, it's not acceptable. And usually that wasn't an issue, but it was just the process of having to do that, and like I'm feeling thoroughly monitored and tracked in my day-to-day life, and just like, hey, like I just want to live somewhere where I can have something different.
Scratch my butt without someone asking me about it.
I definitely, yeah, that, yeah, like not
So,
have somebody go into my room, all those good things.
ooh, so as when we talked last time, it came up that you had a psychedelic assisted transformation. When and how did that come about, and how was that whole shebang?
Oh boy. Um, I would say that was something that was like an onion. So that was a process. I know there's some folks where they have kind of like one huge experience and changes a lot of things for them. I guess I felt like that has been more of an unwinding for myself. So it's
Mm.
a little bit more difficult to point to like here with like it was, this day and this thing happened. But I'd say that has been certainly a a set of tools that have definitely helped me. Um,
Were you scared
I'd
before
say
the first time?
Maybe a little bit. Um, I'm pausing and laughing here because I'm just thinking about what to say, and I think I'll just just say the truth, and I'm sure it won't come back to bite me.
No, it'll be fine.
So the first time I'd ever tried any kind of psychedelics was actually my first use of any sort of illicit anything, um, besides a little bit of underage drinking. But that was um that was while I was still in when I was still in the army, and so was that was an interesting experience, and to have that and to have say like a first kind of like pinprick and like this very rigid kind of I call it like the like cement dome or like iron curtain kind of view, right? Of like this is a very locked in way of thinking. And so that's like Saturday uh on a day off and then going back into work because I think I'm still 20 at the time if I recall. So I still have a couple of years left to go of being in the military and going back in like, huh. And it just started to like get me to ask more questions and really want to know is like what are we doing here and why?
Mm.
And that was something that was I think I forgot to mention that earlier, but like part of that was also precipitated by the other experience that we talked about. It's like okay, like I am here, this person from Florida, and it was 2013 at the time. So it's like I'm here in this situation in 2013 because some allegedly Saudi Arabian guys flew a plane into a building. So we're here in Afghanistan. Right, like yeah, exactly. And that it was the kind of thing that I didn't let myself think about too much at all. Like when we were deployed, I was like, I think it was there a little bit, kind of like a kernel of a thought, and was one of those things like I just don't even want to entertain it because I just don't have the. It's one of those I just don't have the space for it right now. It's a distraction kind of things.
Mm.
And then as I came back, and then I think the psychedelic use really helped bring all that up to the surface. And like, okay, now let's like unpack that further. What's really going on here? So there was definitely an awakening in a form of, I guess, healing, for lack of a better term, or beginning of that process in starting to ask those questions.
It's have you ever seen the movie Encanto?
I don't believe so.
Oh, well, just to bring quickly the what's relevant to this is that there's this house that is magical and it's been in the
Hmm.
family and there's cracks that the sister can see. There's just cracks. And she's
Hmm.
trying to warn them like the magic is going away, that it's not safe and she gets in trouble, for spreading lies. And it's like I don't know, it's the dome was cracked and the questions just have to come out. And it's just this like there's a dam behind it, isn't there? It's just the whooshing water and sorry, I'm not being very coherent, but I'm just feeling it.
I'd say that's a really apt uh, description of. It's funny. It's actually one of the things during that first trip that I remember drawing, right? It was like I think I was actually using a volcano, but people get kind of, or at least I did, I got kind of like artistically inspired and I was drawing and I was just like visually representing that sense of like there is a lot of pent up thought, emotion, whatever it is, like something that is kind of trapped beneath the surface. And
Did you feel kind of like you were waking up from being this machine to being a person, being you?
hmm,
Like the machine was the dream?
don't know if it's ever occurred to me in that kind of way. Um, say it has largely felt like a process of either unlearning or relearning. And that, I guess, like the learning part, and there's the cognitive kind of, okay, maybe the world or the situation or things that I've been taught in the past are not true or not as true, less true, whatever it may be, than other things. And so there's that aspect, and then there is the what you alluded to earlier, that experiential somatic body reaction kind of recoding, if you will, of just that pure reactionary adjustment. And that is something that it feels like it has to catch up sometimes. It's like, okay, like I understand this, a situation may no longer be a threat or is not, in any way, say somebody like looking for a fight or seeking conflict. And also like I need 5 minutes because the body systems still have to catch up and learn that.
Right. And that is the smartest, most amazing thing, when people know themselves well enough to walk away. It's what I'm always trying to teach my girls with their big feelings. Like, sometimes you just have to give people space, including yourself. But how has this healing process changed you as a person?
I definitely find myself being generally, I say generally because these are things that I'm still a human. I find myself being generally more patient. I Oftentimes this is something that takes, I get better and better at it, and it still is the kind of thing that I find having that little bit of space in those 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is, to like, okay, let me just calm down remove myself from the situation and get a little bit of distance. So, sometimes it's a day, whatever it may be, but going back to that experience that I described, that's kind of like, I feel like one of the more extreme examples, but being able to eventually bring myself around and say, okay, like what is going on? Like what is the other person seeing in me that is warranting the reaction that I'm getting from them? And I feel like if we can apply that to something as extreme as a wartime kind of environment, suicide bombing situation, then we can apply that to, I would imagine, pretty much anything. And I do feel that there is, just generally speaking, a lot of value. Like that is a very generally applicable lesson. I feel, is to say, okay, like what is somebody seeing in me that warrants the reaction? What is their experience? Whether that be something they're seeing directly because of me, or something that is they've seen from some other people that they feel is appropriate to me. And I do feel like that can be a very useful exercise, and is also something that I still to this day am far from perfect with that, and struggle with it, especially in a like in the moment. But I found that was I'd say like a really impactful way for me to learn that idea of like, okay, maybe I can try to put myself in somebody else's shoes, or imagine what's going on in their mind, try to empathize a bit. And if I can do that there, that's what I like to think. I could probably do that just about anywhere.
I just can't help but think about all the other people that have seen the terrible things and carried that same guilt and have not had the same tools in healing, and just pushing it down, alcohol and anything to not feel. And what would you just want to say to people listening to this that might resonate with what you're talking about?
Ooh, specifically with the the guilt aspect or the
Mm.
uh, I paused for a while with that one because
That's totally fine. No problem.
that one's honestly tough. Um,
Do you
I
still
don't,
feel that in you? Do you still hold
no,
yourself? Oh, good.
no, and it's yes, it's not tough because I still currently have that experience. It's tough because it's I imagine like if somebody I think about it like if somebody is really really severely depressed, you know, like suicidal kind of depressed, like what do you say to someone in that situation? You know, and it's easy to say like okay, like here's a list of things that have worked for me. Here's what's um you know, here's what's been helpful or here's you know how I got myself out of that hole. And to somebody who is currently in the throes of that, like I remember when I could just loop on that throughout the day. And it wasn't it's one of those things where it wasn't until it stopped that I realized how prolific it had been of, you know, I could just if I wasn't actively engaged in doing something, or even if I was sometimes it could just be like this mental loop and I would go back and it was almost like seeing the scene, but in like a very disembodied way. So I'd be like beside myself watching me, you know, go through and like make the decisions I made and be like, okay, like if I had done this right there, that right there, this other thing right there. And I mean, it's purely speculative. Like who knows? You know, maybe it would have been way worse if I had done insert whatever decision here. And consciously I knew that. And at the same time, there was still that looping kind of process.
Mm.
And so just to, you know, to tell somebody like, hey, it'll get better or it'll, you know, time will make it go away or, you know, just stop drinking, just stop doing drugs. Like, I don't know. I don't know if those things help. So I suppose the only thing I could suggest is probably just like reach out and find guys that you can relate to because I know it's also difficult to just like share that with everybody. There's a lot of like people aren't going to relate, they're not going to understand, and to this day it's not something that comes up often because it's I just don't think it's necessarily relevant to the vast majority of conversations.
Yeah.
uh like you know, and I'm sure like many people have similar stories, right, where like that just doesn't need to come up in the day to day. um So yes, the only thing is I could say is reach out to guys, like especially if there's folks that you were with that you can speak to. Those are probably some of the best people to talk to. And if not, somebody who can relate to the experience in general is probably your best bet. And just knowing that you are not alone in that, I would guess is probably the most helpful, like, actionable resource for somebody in that position.
Mm. Before you uh, were on that journey of using psychedelics to help with just unraveling that onion that you were, um, was there a kind of counseling involved in the process? Was it like a, or was it just a on your own, all by yourself, just meditating and sorting things out?
um, Honestly, it was at the beginning, it was I didn't even have the realization that these things could be as uh, medicinal or have the kind of health impacts as they could be. So I would say it was much more coming from the perspective of I'm doing drugs. Um, so
I am gonna
that's, you
have
know,
an interesting escape from this crap.
we're, we're gonna, like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to have an experience, you know. Actually, the first time I ever tried anything was, if anything, it was purely from this ego-driven kind of headspace. Because for context, I may or may not have still been in the army at the time. I can't fully
May or may
remember
not.
that.
Allegedly. Yeah.
Yeah, rumors say. But I was with some a friend of mine, a roommate at the time, and at this time it was we had actually myself and one other guy had quietly gone out and we had gotten a another house off the post, the military installation, and so we had our rooms in the barracks that were basically it was just kind of like okay, they're kept super simple and clean and neat and tidy. So if somebody comes around and wants to do a room inspection or walks in, they walk in, they see like oh, everything looks good, no questions asked. We have a house that we're living in that is kind of like ours, our home, our party pad, all that good stuff. And that's where all the fun happens. And so we had another roommate who worked in town. He was a waiter, like not at all in the military. And at one time he came back in and was just like, "Hey guys, like I got some acid. You want to try some of this?" Like, all right, cool. Like let's maybe I don't know what this means. Like what I've barely heard of this stuff before, growing up in the Southeast. And like let's watch some YouTube videos about people's experience and see what it is. And I just remember, watching some of the people that were recording their videos about, oh, I had, this experience and that experience and whatever was going on. And a part of the reason I remember being willing to do it was because I remember being like, okay, if this guy can do this stuff, I can do this stuff. It was this purely like ego driven place of, well, I'm at least as capable as that guy of handling myself. So yeah, I got this. Uh, what could possibly go wrong?
So how did
Uh,
you experience it? What did you see or feel, or did did you have an out of body experience?
oh, I would say initially, honestly, it was, and I know sometimes psychedelics can take people to some really intense places, and so it's not necessarily it's not always a fun and games recreational kind of experience, which I had no idea of at the time.
Hmm.
And fortunately for me, especially those first experiences, was great. It was a very positive experience. It was very fun. If anything, it I would say that was part of the medicinal aspect for me at the time, was just having a sense of lightheartedness, a sense of fun, finding a lot more joy, just being able to experience a lot more happiness and joy in day-to-day life. And at the time, I don't think it really consciously clicked that hey, these are the things that I am cutting myself off from, that I am just so completely numbed out that I'm not really having those experiences, or I'm in an environment that I'm not actually, happy in.
Just had this
And
mental picture of your joy just being under a lid, being in a bottle and under a lid, and just that lid coming off. Like,
mhm. It was like getting to get a peek at those things. And then there was also like a broadening of perspectives that came in, or of like a questioning. And at the time, it wasn't even like, I wasn't even that far into it. I was just like a broadening of perspectives, of a mental loosening, if you will, of, hmm, just, I guess, more curiosity of like, what's a desire to know, like, what's going on here? What are we actually doing? Why are we actually engaged in all this mess?
hmm.
So it's just like the willingness to pull those threads is how I describe it. And especially after finding that sense of combination of like internal calm and like momentary um happiness, and just being like, okay, like if this is what's out there, this is one thing that we can experience. And I didn't fully at the time just attribute it to like, okay, like I've just taken a substance and that's why I feel this way, and I can just have that anytime I take this. It kind of suggested to me like, oh, this is out there for us to experience or to have anywhere we are in the world, and it is a tool. And I'm definitely not having that experience in my day-to-day life while I'm here. So like if that's the case, if like, I think it just brought me to question like which version of life do I want, or do I want to pursue?
Hmm. It seems like a really valuable thing. Like, it doesn't, obviously, it's not for everyone, but it's for something to crack through that armor of the identity of, but I'm just a proud American doing my duty, and the whole glorification of war and all these movies and all these things, like that smoke screen, that illusion. It's like, what does it take to, like, it's the American dream, you know, work really hard, and you'll get rich, and you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And it's like, the pulling yourself up by the bootstraps was never an instruction manual. It was a lesson in ridiculousness.
Mm-hmm.
But so many people are just not going to be ready to let go of that identity and ever question. But this podcast is for people who question, man. It's for people who are open to wonder and magic. So we met through Aubin Lebras,
Mm-hmm.
who's a rainbow magician, and he works with chakras, and he's does energetic healing, and it's a really interesting experience to be a part of a rainbow magic session, and that's where we connected.
This is true.
So how do you experience rainbow magic, and how has it helped you?
That's interesting. I've done a handful of sessions with Aubin. I'd say like two, three. Yeah, I want to say like somewhere in that vicinity. Uh, I remember when he was beginning on that journey, because initially we had met through the group that I used to work with, and he was an attendee at some of our events, and so I knew him pre Rainbow Magic era, and so that was cool to see that kind of shift for him.
Yeah. See him come into his gift.
Yeah, and as having been in that space for a little while, I've seen a handful of folks who have like various, especially like getting into the more energetic, the more subtle realms. A handful of folks that have various offerings they have in that regard, and so I definitely regard that as like another tool in that realm. But I can say that my experience with it has definitely helped me like bring my awareness to these different aspects of myself and relate to these parts of myself in a little bit of a different way, would be the first thing I'd say. And I guess for more clarification on that, I think the first time, if I recall, the first time I ever did anything with Aubin in this realm, it was an exercise where he would start with each energy center of like the 7 primary, chakra systems, and would say like, okay, like think about like what does, wealth or abundance or, whatever it is look like to you in this regard. And so it got me to like think of these things as a form of intelligence center is part of how I would relate to it, like after this, because it just got me to kind of like, how am I relating to the world via this aspect of myself? So for example, like if we look at root, that is like our fundamental connection to earth. That's safety, security, stability. Like, okay, how am I relating and thinking about the world through this lens? And that is, say, if we're looking at it from like an abundance or a wealth perspective, that's a lot of times where folks get caught. And, whenever we think of like, oh, how do I relate to abundance? There's like this monetary element to it. Like, okay, like how do I relate to this from that perspective? And that is just one dimension. And then when you kept bringing it up and it's like, okay, now we're looking at sacral, solar plexus, heart, so on and so forth. For me, each of those became a very different thing or a very different way of relating. So then it's like, okay, like how am I relating now via, if we look at sacral, like via social environments, via collaboration, creative projects, sexuality. Solar plexus would be like personal autonomy, business. How am I like relating in that regard? And I just found it to be a really interesting exercise, like even just as an exercise by itself. I found it to be like really fascinating, and that has doing that alone has changed the way that I will relate to and think about, this energy center thing. It changed it for me so that there's a difference in just how I use those or relate to them rather. And on the flip side of it, where I know Aubin is like, okay, it's like as he's going through, he's doing his thing, which is something that is like I'm not quite sure how to describe that right because I don't necessarily have. Okay, well, we're on the same page there. Then is that?
Not a clue what he's doing,
Yeah,
but I can feel something happening sometimes, and I can feel tingles in my head, and like I know something is going on, but I don't know what it is.
absolutely. Yeah, I've definitely as the years have gone on, like to be clear, when I first say like got out of the military and say like I went into massage school, within the year or so after I got out, which is a very different world. And so initially, folks would talk about these chakras or these energy center things, and I just kind of yeah,
Weirdos.
I was like okay, cool. I don't think so, but fine. So to be clear, this is something that I came to adopt, um, and in some cases, it's like I do relate or experience those things very somatically sometimes. And so whether it's a swirling pool of energy, in the middle of your solar plexus, or whether it is, a bundle of nerves, like whatever works for you, I can say that I have definitely somatically, felt some kind of experience and have also noticed the outside world showing back what I have been feeling internally,
Mm.
for lack of a better term. So doing these sessions with Aubin, there have been some times where I noticed what felt like some drastic changes in the outside world suddenly,
Wow.
or just, yeah, maybe opportunities or situations, and would see those changes. And I think, I say this in retrospect, right? And it's, who knows? Because it's for me at least difficult to say, oh yes, I did this energetic thing internally, and then the outside world almost immediately changed to match that. And is it that? Is it like I do believe that it is, and I also tend to hesitate in terms of speaking absolutes when it comes to the esoteric or like the less physical of like, yes, this is obviously what happened, just kind of on principle. I don't like to, force those perspectives on anybody or even
Yeah.
myself because, they could change.
Yeah. And our realities can be different somehow.
hmm But going back to the bombing experience, this is, I guess, like some of the details about it that I think make it especially interesting, and or not only interesting, but also significantly contributed to that being a part of the spiritual path, if you will. Willingness to accept that there is something else besides the purely physical realm, whether that be different planes, whether that be fully higher powers. I still don't, 100% know to this day, but I will say that the experience at the time, there's a handful of things. There was one, so you get off the back of a helicopter and they kick up a lot of dust, right? Like it's just full brown out. You just grab there's like a little on the plate carriers, there's like a little carrying handle. And a lot of times I would just like reach out and grab the handle on the guy in front of me just so that we didn't lose each other because we were on a team. And then he had like a wrist garment, like this little wrist GPS that would have coordinates where we needed to go pre-entered. And it would just have an arrow that would just point in the direction we needed to go. So for those first like 10, 15 seconds, whatever it is, when we're at our most vulnerable of, just a group of people in the middle of a giant dust cloud on the back of a helicopter that can't see anything. And he would just arrow, so like, okay, points that way. We're just going to run that direction. And for those first few seconds, this was the one and only time I've seen this happen. I don't know if anybody else has any stories about this, but the little arrow indicator on the Garmin, it was just spinning in a circle. So we just kind of both took that moment and we're just like, okay, like we're just gonna sit here and we're just gonna hang out and we're gonna take a knee. And because that happened, we didn't actually start walking until the dust had settled and we could see where we were going. And I remember as we were coming up on this area where this minefield was, I distinctly remember seeing this little bit of a path on the ground. And I don't know if that was also visible from like on the physically speaking, like if I had been out there, this is all under night vision, right? So this is just in like open terrain, like there's no like trail, if you will. It almost just, there was just like a section on the ground that looked like it was glowing somehow, like a little path. And I don't know if that was physically there, like it was somehow physically different, or if that was just divinely
some
inspired.
insight that you got.
I don't know, but I do remember like seeing that and simultaneously hearing, feeling, like viscerally, like feeling, if anything, a voice. And do you ever get like those little intuitive nudges that are like, hey, maybe you should like, I don't know, turn right here, and it's like, oh, okay, you missed a traffic jam or whatever. And it's, at least whenever I've had these, it'll oftentimes be this quiet, I've got to be, calm and just attentive to notice those things. And if I'm distracted or worried or caught up in, thinking about stuff, it'll oftentimes kind of get lumped in with all of these other thoughts or distractions. It was like if that voice just like reached down and like grabbed you by the shirt collar and like got in your face. And so it was just, I just remember hearing this voice and it just said, stay on that path. And it was just like somebody had just like given me a quick little, like, like you listen to me. And it's just like in the moment, I didn't even think anything about it. I was just like, cool, like a voice from another dimension, I guess, told me to stay on this glowing trail on the ground. Like, yeah, got it. Like, I'm just going to do it. I didn't even question it. I was just like, yeah, obviously, we just stay on that trail. Like, I don't know, why would you not? And like, I still remember the shape of it and everything, and it was, I just, so myself and the guy that I was with, we were the first two people to cross this minefield as well, because we ended up on the opposite side of it. So then like later in the night, we had to go back across it. But at first, like we had no idea, right? So the two of us, we just kind of like bounced ourselves. We just walked across this field and no idea. And this was, I don't know, probably like 9 years later, I was talking to that guy and I had mentioned something about that. And the way that I remember this is that we just both naturally fell into step, or that I just kind of naturally drifted into step behind him. And we just cruised through. And normally we would be kind of wedged out, kind of like at a 45-degree angle off of each other for like space and visibility and all this other good stuff. But I just kind of was like, I think I'm just supposed to stay on this path. And when I spoke to him, he said, oh yeah, I remember. He looked at me, he's like, yeah, you said like, hey, look at that path, stay on that right there. And I could give him like a little nudge or something. It's like, I don't remember that at all. I have zero recollection of that. So I don't know if that was me and I forgot, or if that was, something else that, you thought it was me.
Did he
And
see it glowing as well, or was it still glowing when you had to go back across it the other way?
I don't remember it when I was going back. And I think I might have also taken a different route out than I took in. But yeah, it was interesting. I don't remember seeing that in any way on the way out, or having, any of that voice coming in.
Wow.
And then with the suicide bombers themselves, like this is all in retrospect, right? But so we also like happened to like walk past them first, and it was just like, hey, you stop, put your hands in the air, kind of like a regular detaining process. And and this is where the guilt trip came in, because I was taking the slack out of the trigger just like reflexively. And then at the very like basically last possible second, I remember stopping, and there was something that like switched. There's like a mental flip that happened where I would just, there was this person, sitting on the ground in front of me with their hands in the air. And eventually I was like, wait. That person's not a threat. They're just sitting there with their hands in the air. And you're kind of like, okay, cool. And then at that moment, somebody came up behind us and was like, hey, you guys can push out to your spot. We're good. We got this. And so we, walk, 20, 30 feet away or whatever. And then, you know, then it got more exciting. Anyway, so this was a couple of key things. I think though was one, the GPS, two was like the path on the ground, three was the voice. And those are the pieces that I come back to. Four was that momentary like mental flip. And so I just never thought about those things because they didn't fit with my worldview for a long time. It was like, if it's not 100% tangible, then it doesn't exist and I don't have to think about it. And so there was a kind of cognitive dissonance where I just like pushed that out of my mind. Don't think about it. Don't worry about it. No issue. And it wasn't until years later, it was actually part of some kind of meditative exercise I was doing in this group. And it was like, oh, hey, go back and like see the people that that have died. And so it was like, okay, like family, friends. It was just like a handful of things. And this is a completely sober experience too. And then at one point, there was a bit of a pause. And then I remember just more than seeing a face or a name, I felt a presence. Sometimes like sometimes you're with somebody and they have a distinct feel to being around them. And so it was like that. It was a very distinct presence, and there was no face, there was no name to go with it. And I sat there for a while and kind of paused, like I don't know what this is. And then eventually I recognized, it was like, oh, like it's you two. It's the people, the suicide bombers from that night. I just recognized them as, or at least like that's what it felt like. It was like, oh, you again. And the conversation or the dialogue, the experience, right? Whatever we want to chalk it up to, said like, hey, like basically just like hi. And also it was like, just to let you know, that path that you saw that night was like, because we were the ones who either in place or like we knew where everything was. So it's like we were the ones who, operating from a different plane, our higher selves, if you will, for lack of a better term, maybe that is the best term, but showed you where this path was, and it was an experience that you needed to go through because like it was an important lesson there was an important lesson that you would get out of it. And there was also with that kind of the idea that there was a moment of recognition whenever we were like face to face with each other. And like obviously not on the physical level, but there was a moment of recognition at like a spiritual higher level that was like, okay, hey, like remember the thing, like now we're gonna go do the thing. Like, and there was almost this felt sense of it's like this way that it was like if somebody's trying to wake you up, right? Like nudge, like shake you awake, but this is on a different plane and in a different manner. And so yeah, so that was again, the experience of it was like, this is the way that I relate to that whole experience now. It's like if there was somebody who was like, hey, like I'm doing this to wake you up. I'm doing this because you need like this little gentle nudge to bring yourself into the light, like into awareness, for lack of some better terms. And on the human plane, those things can look like fucked up, right? For like from what our perspective as humans, we'd be like, oh my God, this is wild. This is absolutely unhinged behavior. And that there is perhaps a spiritual element to that is us helping each other find our way back.
Wow.
And so yeah, I don't know if I was like, I don't know if that is just my brain trying to like play some trick on me to like, how do I reconcile this? How do I like come to terms with this? And if it is, like, that's cool because that's just our subconscious doing cool things to, help us get the best out of a situation. And then on the flip side of that, and this is my own personal belief, is that there is that more subtle spiritual realm that we are interacting with. And so that was fascinating. And yeah, I think that's where I'll pause for the time being.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This is some heavy, heavy stuff, and I really appreciate your vulnerability and rawness and sharing about it, and that this is for the people out there that want to feel understood and want to feel some hope and some direction in their healing process. And I know that this podcast is gonna reach people that it's meant to. So thank you for being willing.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this is really great. I feel like a really great time for this because I've now gotten to the place with this where I'm able to relate to it in a different way. And we're like sharing this. Like at one time, like sharing this was like, oh God, like there's this thing that happened to me and I just have to like get this off my chest and just share this, story every now and then. But more so, I can relate to this much more so in a, hey, here's an experience, but here's the takeaway from it. Here's the lesson from that, the silver lining, if you will.
If anybody would like to reach out to you after listening to this, would you be open to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. I can put the information, the best way that people can reach you, all your links. I can put that down in the description and show notes. And yeah, I will put whatever you give me down below.
Okay, cool. Perfect. Yes.
Yay. So the way that I end my conversations is I give hugs. Hugs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kate.
If you are still here, thank you so much for listening this far and really being open to hear. It gives me so much hope to hear these powerful stories of people genuinely growing, healing, moving beyond their limited perspective into a better life and into a better space. And so we mentioned rainbow magic a bit towards the end of the conversation, and it has really been a game changer for me. It's like a group meditation that happens every Saturday, and you bring your pain to the table. You don't positive vibes it away and act like it doesn't exist. You look at it with compassion. You look at the root. You go to the inner child. You're in a safe space to be vulnerable and to believe that those things that hurt can be alchemized into their opposite counterpart. If you're feeling worthless, to feel your worthiness. And a very special thing is that Aubin offers free rainbow magic sessions every Saturday at 10 p.m. my time. I'm in CET time zone, but I will put the times and his website down below in the description so that you can check it out. It's usually a small group, and it's so powerful to be around people willing to be vulnerable because they really believe in the value of it and they see the effect that it has on their lives. And to be one of those people that's being vulnerable, and I've seen the effect that it's had on my life in being able to work through my poop and process things a lot faster than I did before. So I would love to see you there. I'm a regular. I'm there every Saturday doing that inner work, loving that inner child that needs that love. Yeah. If you would like to support the work of this channel by giving a donation, I have a PayPal account that I have linked in the description or show notes wherever you are listening to this, YouTube or Spotify. I have been so incredibly thankful for the support that I have received in putting this message out there. And I can't even tell you just what a boost of encouragement it is. So thanks again, and look out for the next epic episode.